Hello everyone, today I'd like to share with you the completion of my improv top. For those of you that are new to my channel, welcome, and I suppose really I should give you a little bit of back history to the making of this top. After I finished making a quilt called the Spring Equinox quilt earlier in the year, I had some leftover fabric. Like all of us, when we finish a project, there's often scraps of fabric left over. And I process it in a particular way, as we all do. And it suddenly occurred to me how I really enjoyed the way this yellow and the orange and the green and the white work together. So I thought I might like to make a scrappy improv quilt from the leftovers pieces of quilts that had those colours in. And you might be aware, if you've been watching me, that shortly I'm going to be going off to Spain to spend some time with my sister. And so in my sewing room, I was looking to tie up loose ends. And if there was projects I could complete quickly, that's what I would do. Well, I had quite a few of these improv blocks made. And so foolishly, as it turned out, I thought, I'll just add a few more blocks and I'll make a quilt and it will be ready for when I come back to complete. And so let me show you how I got on with that not so speedy process. And just for a bit of fun, I've added a daily timeline so that you can see how this improv quilt making just took me a couple of days. I thought it would take me 3 at tops to complete this. So the first thing I did was to take out all of the blocks that I had already made and to lay them out in front of me on a table just to see how many I had. Today I have decided that I'm going to make a concentrated effort in finishing the blocks to make this improv quilt. So I've laid everything out on my table that I have. So I have a few 8-inch squares in mainly green. I have one in white and green. I have a few 5.5-inch squares as well, and there are a few mainly green, quite a few white and yellow, quite a few white and green, and then I have these 3-inch squares. So I have some white and green, mainly green and white, a few yellow and green, 2 white and yellow, and a nice little pile of mainly yellow. And then I have 3 little sets of 8 inches by 3 inches. So there's a couple of mainly yellow, there's one white and yellow, and a couple of mainly green. So as you can see from the blocks that I've just showed you, that it is a controlled improv quilt. So it's controlled by the colour and it's controlled by the shapes within the blocks. So they are either rectangles or squares, and they are controlled by the sizes. So I have 3-inch, 5.5-inch, 8-inch, 3-inch by 8-inch rectangles. And it can be a combination of any of those, but those are the ones I'd made so far. And the reason I'd made that was because I thought they would slot together nicely. So when I come to put the quilt together with all these disparaging blocks, they would all work together in a little improv miracle. So then I knew what blocks I had made and how many there were. And it looked quite a lot while it was on the table. And so I thought, well, I'll take out all my pre-cut fabric scraps that I'd stored away in those colours, and I would just add a few more blocks to what I already had and take it from there. Now I've got to say, I may have a little bit of an issue with detail. I wasn't so aware of it until I was making this top. Now I might need a little bit of help. So silly little things just took me forever to do. But I took the fabric out that I had, and I was pleased with everything that was already pre-cut. Well, that was a surprise. I've just taken all of my pre-cuts out, and I have quite a lot of yellow, green and white 3-inch squares, so they'll fit into the quilt. And then I've got some 2.5-inch strips in white, 1 in green, some yellow, a little bit of orange, and then 1 3/8 strips in white, lots of yellow and some green. Now, I was aware that making the blocks did take time. It didn't matter when I was just making a few. It was quite refreshing, really, just to sort of cleanse the palette. That's one of the terms you hear YouTubers saying when they've finished a big project and they just want to do a little bit of sewing before the next big project. And so these quilt blocks that I had made must have taken me quite a while, but I just wasn't really aware of the time. But I was aware that I wanted to work quickly. And so I was looking for ways to create these blocks quickly. What I had done in the past is when I'd put some colours together, if I wasn't keen on the way the block had worked, I would cut it down and make it smaller and then build it up again. So for this time, I thought rather than cut it down, I would just make it bigger. And sometimes it would work. So one of the ways that I'm using now to help speed things along a little bit is when I've made a block like this one in front of me, which is trimmed to 5.5 inches square, and I don't like it. So rather than cut it down to 3-inch squares, I'm going to start building it up. Go larger rather than smaller. And now I have an 8-inch square, and I think that works better. It's not perfect, but I think when it's with all the other blocks, that'll work well. And so probably that's one of my issues. Looking for perfection. That in itself perhaps isn't an issue, although I don't really think that perfection is obtainable, but it's very subjective, isn't it? So sometimes I'm making a block and I don't know how I want it to look. I just know when it doesn't look right and I try and fix that. But working in that way, growing a block, that helped me let that unobtainable goal slip a little bit. So it wasn't a perfect block, but it was okay, and I was all right with okay. So I'm just trimming down this little block to measure 5.5 inches square, and you can see it's just over 6 inches. It's almost 6.5 inches. And so what I'm going to do is add a strip of white here. The slither will be on ready for the next block. Well, I've added that strip, and now I'm going to trim to 5.5 inches square. I've trimmed that block, and now I've got the slither for the next block. And that I also found worked. If you have a block and it's too big for your size and you cut it down, sometimes you're left with a narrow edge, and that's really difficult to work with. But if you've got a large block and you add another piece of fabric to that, then you cut it down to size, that narrow piece is now sturdy because it's part of another block. And so that worked. So that saved me time as well. And another time saver I found is that every time I go to sit at my sewing machine, I'm going to work on all of the part blocks at the same time, even if I'm just adding a tiny little slither. Doesn't matter, each of them is being built up slowly. So at the moment, I've just come back from pressing these part blocks, and there are 6 at the moment. And when they do start to take on a little bit of a personality like this one here, now I'm in the position that I can start making conscious decisions of what colour I want to put where. And that helps speed up the process again. So rather than just work on one block and trying to make that work, if I was working on lots of different parts of blocks, then they came together quicker. It did help me with my little pursuit of perfection problem. PPPs. Well, I spent the day yesterday just making blocks, and it's a very slow process, no matter how I try to speed it up. So what I'm going to do now, before I do anything else, is lay them all out and just have a look now and see what I've got. So I'm trying to put them down quickly, instinctively, rather than spend a lot of time thinking about that. So I'm thinking I might go from left to right in a sort of green swathe, mainly green, and then yellow and white in the opposite direction. And then perhaps around the centre, use some of the yellows and greens together. So that's the layout of all of the 8-inch squares. And now I'm going to look at the 3 by 8-inch rectangles. So I've put the 3 by 8-inch rectangles in now. I think the thing is to work quickly to try and get a little bit of spontaneity in this quilt. So now I'm going to work on the 5.5-inch squares. So you can see I was really trying hard to relinquish some control. I wanted it to be free and spontaneous. And so the way that I was working was to just put them down quickly. Unfortunately, my sewing room, we're all on one level, but my sewing room is along the corridor and then into the living area, into the lounge. And so it was quite a trek up and down, up and down. And then when you put something down on the floor and then come back and find another block and try and put that down, things do get a bit mixed up. Anyway, I didn't do too badly, I don't think. So I've just roughly put those down into colour blocks. So you can see I was trying to get the green across the centre and then yellow in both sides. But now as I'm looking at this, the thing I'm most drawn to is where I'm grouping the fabrics together. So same fabrics touching where possible. I think that's working nicely. So relinquishing control. Is that really control? I'm not sure. I just like the way the colours of the same fabric work together. It just sort of increased the shape and I thought it made it look more impactful. But what I haven't got is lots of the same sort of design in fabrics because it was only the pieces and some of them were tiny that were left over from other projects. And so I did have difficulty trying to clump these same designs together or just to use the smallest amount to tie it into a little area. So that did slow me down a little bit. So I haven't used any of the 3-inch blocks yet. I've got lots of 3-inch blank squares and I've got lots of 3-inch blocks that I've worked into with little details. So I've got those 3-inch blocks that I like the look of together, and so it's just a 4th one here that I need to make, and I'm going to make that white and green so that it ties in with the block next to it. So that's beginning to get nice light and airy in the greens there. So less improvisational now, more planned. And now I've finished that block and I've also made a little 3-inch block and I'm putting in these little tiny details, this tiny slither of yellow. I don't think anyone will ever really notice that, but I do. And I'm enjoying doing it. And at the moment it's early in the morning, so I'm full of energy and they might not be so frequent later in the day as I tire, but at the moment it's worth the effort. Tiny slither of yellow. It's got to be 2/8 of an inch wide finished. But I really love it. And if I'm in that position again, will I repeat it? Probably. I said, I really do need help, don't I? I can hear it as I'm explaining to you, making excuses for myself. Yes. Okay, let's move on. Well, I was feeling quite cheery. I sewed those blocks together. I'd admired that little yellow piece and I've just placed it with the rest, and I've sewn that strip on the wrong side. That piece here should be here. Oh, yeah, I will unpick it. Now this will slow me down if I do that too often. Well, I think that does look better, so I shall sew those together now. That block's been fixed. Sew those together and then I'll sew that row. I mean, seriously, would anybody on this planet have noticed that that was a wrong block? When it's all put together in this improv style modern quilt, would anyone have known? No, apart from me. And that's because of that little trek from the living area into the sewing room. I just twisted it around. But if I'd have just put that in, sewn that in, of all that chaos that's in that quilt, I would have looked at that and said, I wish I'd have turned that around. And so I did. And so that's another strip down, and today is Friday, so on a weekend we sometimes have visitors come in, sometimes they have a dog, and so I need to make sure that everything is off the floor today. So I'm going to continue working as I am for now, and then I'll probably move it into the sewing room. So it's not something I do very often, is to commandeer the lounge floor. I mean, my husband is understanding, and as long as I'm locked away with the door shut in my sewing room and he has the freedom to watch all the sports he wants and do the things he wants, he's quite supportive of my hobby. But it did spill over into our living space, and I've got to say he was really good, because it was down for the best part of 3 days on the floor and we were having to tiptoe around the edges. Thank you, darling. I never call him darling. He'll think there's something really seriously wrong. Well, I did manage to piece everything up, and it's still Friday. It's getting late, but it's still Friday, and I've pinned it to the wall in my sewing room. It measures 46 inches square, and now what I'm going to do is to start working on the outside. So I want to try and make it really light, so it's going to disappear into white. So I'm going to look first of all at the blocks that I have, see which of those I can use. But before I pinned that onto the wall, I did do a row of stay stitching around the whole of that central block, the centre part of the quilt, because there are so many tiny little seams that the weight of it, they would have just started to be pulled apart. I am only using a small stitch length, about 1.5, but they still would have pulled, I think. And so before I pinned it up, I just secured that around the outside. So today is Saturday, and I didn't work on it last night because I suddenly became really tired. I did pin up 2 8-inch blocks on the points of each corner, and what I've decided I'm going to do is to make an 8-inch border of all of these little improv blocks all the way around. So that will grow it to a nice size quilt. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to aim for a little bit of balance, so I'm going to do some blocks that are repeated and then bring on the chaotic tumbling blocks in between, and we'll see how that works. So in the end, I didn't do too many of the same repeated blocks. There are these 2 in the top left hand corner, and they're repeated in the bottom right hand corner, and then there are these 2 little corners here, that one and that one, and they're repeated in the bottom right hand corner. And in the end, that's all I did. I decided to keep every block different. So this block will fit on the bottom right hand corner, and so now I want an 8-inch next to that on the top, and then on the left hand side. So these are 2 improv blocks that I already have made. That they measure 5.5 inches, and so what I want to do is to grow those into 8-inch blocks. And so this block measures 6 inches by 6 inches, and I'm going to cut that into quarters. Well, I think I'm happy with those parts. All the colours are grouped together or touching, so I'll put those together. Well, yesterday I may have been a tad optimistic because I think I recall saying I'm just going to make these 8-inch square blocks and finish it. Well, today's Sunday and I've just popped in my sewing room for a while to get what I can done. I was hoping to get 26 blocks finished yesterday. I suppose that was a little bit optimistic, and I managed to get 6 complete. Today, obviously, there are 20 left, and I'm going to work and do what I can. To be honest, I do have some 5.5-inch squares that I can use today, so it's not all from scratch. But the ones that I've got up there I think look nice, and I'm just going to crack on. And you can tell that at the start of each day I really thought I'm going to get that finished today. I don't know why, because I know how long it takes me to make these blocks, but every day I thought, oh, I'll get that finished today. I didn't. If you want to make a quilt in a hurry, I wouldn't suggest an improv quilt. Today is Monday, and as you can see, it's still not quite finished. I have 14 blocks left to make to complete the border. I would like to say that I shall get it finished today. I really think that I've got a good chance. But we shall see. At the moment, I've only pinned the blocks onto the wall because I might be changing some of these around a little bit. And where's the reasoning in that? If I am making a particular block to fit in a particular area on the border so that it matches the pieces by it, why would I, when I've made that block, decide then to move it around? It doesn't make sense, does it? That's what I did, but it doesn't make sense. Okay, I think I'm going to work on this cornerstone next and see what happens. Well, today is Tuesday and I'm back again. So I have 6 blocks left to make, 4 along the bottom and 2 on the left hand side. 2 of those are quite simple to make, mainly white to bring some airiness. If you look on the right hand side, you'll see a gap there, white, and I think that really brings a sense of rest to that corner. So I want to do that in the left and the bottom. So I'll get on and see how today goes. Well, I'm just putting a new bobbin in and I'm wondering if this is the bobbin that will see me to the end of this piecing of the top. And I think that in itself is a perfect illustration of how my mind was working at that point. The fact that I'm talking to a bobbin and urging it to help me finish the quilt with just what's on the spool. I bet I'm not the only one who's done that either. You know. Well, I finished that side and I'm pleased with that. And now I'm just focusing on that top left-hand block. It's the only one that's solid like that. Oh, my boiled eggs are cooked. So I'll go and attend to that. But that top left block I'm going to work on, take that out and change that. So even though I was desperate to get this quilt top finished, I think I can just lift it up and show you there. There you go. That heavy block from that top left corner I changed and made it look much lighter. Again, who notices things like that? Me, that's who. Well, today's Wednesday and all the blocks are complete. I finished them last night. That little bobbin saw me through. I haven't joined them yet because I have been moving some of the blocks around. So I need to put all of this together now and we'll have a look at the finished flimsy. And that's it finished. I've put some stay stitch in around the outside because there's a lot of little seams around the edges. It measures 61 inches square. It's sort of like an explosion, isn't it? You can imagine a paint pot being dropped in the centre and all the outsides are little splashes. Whoops, a little bit blowy, but I think it looks really fresh and bright. It'd be lovely in the spring or summer. If I was going to keep this one for myself, I'd probably make it as a coverlet, so just a backing and the top quilted together, but I intend to make this and put it in my Etsy shop, and so I will quilt it when I get back from Spain. That'll be on my list of jobs to do. And so that's the story of my improv quilt that is controlled so much that it's probably no longer an improv quilt, but I really did enjoy making it, and I hope you enjoyed watching the process. So if you are still with me, I would like to thank you very much for your company. Please take really good care of yourselves, and I'll see you again soon. I'll leave you with a shot of this flimsy blowing in the breeze. Bye.